Happy Thanksgiving, and welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Carolina Panthers at the Dallas Cowboys in their Week 12 matchup played November 26, 2015. This was the second game on Thanksgiving, and what a blowout this was. Total domination by the Carolina Panthers, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And Romo looks to be lost for the season for the Cowboys in the loss. But we're going to go over the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis. So in the very first possession of the game, Tony Romo was intercepted by Kurt Coleman, and he ran it back 36 yards for the pick six. Gano added the extra point, and it was 7-0. Carolina over Dallas less than a minute into the game. The Panthers ended up with a 49-yard field goal then with a little over 8 minutes still left in the first quarter as Gano made it 10-0. The Cowboys would get on the board with about a minute and a half left in the first when Dan Bailey hit a 21-yard field goal to make the score 10-3 as they cut the Panthers' lead to 7. So that was the score after the first quarter. Then in the second quarter, Gano hit a 43-yard field goal with about 3.5 minutes left before halftime as the Panthers extended their lead to 10 with the score Carolina 13, Dallas 3. Luke Kuechly would intercept Tony Romo about a minute later with 2.5 minutes left to play in the second quarter, and he ran it back 32 yards for the pick six. Gano added the extra point, and it was 20-3 Panthers over the Cowboys as they extended their lead to 17. On the very next play from scrimmage, Kuechly would intercept Romo a second time, the third interception for the Panthers defense in the first half, and that would end up leading to a 25-yard field goal by Gano as time expired in the first half with the score 23-3, with the Panthers up by 20 points at halftime. So then in the third quarter, the Cowboys would get back on the scoreboard with a 48-yard field goal by Dan Bailey that made it 23-6, and that was about midway through the third quarter. Then with less than half a minute left still in the third, Cam Newton took it in himself on a 4-yard touchdown run, and that was the first offensive score of the game, or at least first offensive touchdown of the game. And Gano added the extra point, and it was 30-6 as the Panthers were now up by 24 points. And on the final play of the third quarter, Tony Romo was dropped as he got sacked, and he got put on his shoulder. And with that play, it looks like he's re-injured his left collarbone. So the injury that ended up taking him out, it was actually sacked by Thomas Davis Sr., and so that injured Romo's left collarbone as he came down on his shoulder, and he ended up leaving the game. So Romo left the game on the final play of the third quarter, and it looks like he's going to be done for the season. And the Panthers would end up on the next possession getting a 50-yard field goal by Gano with about 10.5 left in this game, and that made it 33-6. Carolina over Dallas. The Cowboys would end up getting a touchdown via Matt Castle to Cole Beasley about 6 minutes later, a 2-yard touchdown pass, and then Castle hit Darren McFadden for the 2-point conversion, which made it 33-14 as they were able to get on the scoreboard in garbage time, and that would be the final score as the Panthers ended up with a missed field goal on the resulting possession as they got down into Dallas territory, but then penalties pushed them back, and they ended up, it was actually a blocked field goal as Crawford got a hand on it. It was a 43-yard attempt by Gano, and so it remained 33-14, and that would be the final score as the Carolina Panthers are now 11-0 on the season. They're 5-0 on the road, and the Cowboys are now 3-8, 1-5 at home. So they've won just one game in Dallas, and now they've lost Tony Romo, it looked like, for the season as he re-injures his left collarbone. And Romo in this game just did not look himself at all. It wasn't the Romo that we're used to seeing out there. As he was really just staring down his receivers on those interceptions. It looked like as if coming out of the huddle, he had already made his decision of who he was going to throw to, as he was just staring down his number one targets and not even taking his eyes off of them, and just throwing the ball into coverage. Almost, in the first interception, just a minute into the game, Coleman was sitting on that route, and it was as if Romo didn't even see him. He was just so zoned in on his receiver. And then even with the interceptions by Kuechly on back-to-back plays later on, Kuechly was all over Jason Witten, and Romo just seemed as if he was determined to toss the ball his way regardless. Cole Beasley looked to be open on those plays, and he just wasn't making those second reads. He was, like I said, just zoned in on that first read, staring him down. And, that's what's going to be the result if you're letting the defense know where you're going to go with the ball. They're going to come away with it. And that's how we saw those 3 picks in the first half by Romo. Seemed as if something was bothering him already, and then he ends up getting dropped on that blitz as Thomas Davis just came in there and dropped him, and he re-injured his left collarbone, as it turns out. And the Panthers, though, they were looking really good, not just on defense. On offense, they were moving the ball, but the Cowboys actually were doing pretty good on defense, that they were holding them to the field goals, as Gano just kept kicking field goals all day long. He ended up with 4 out of 5. Of course, that one blocked field goal. But the Panthers, they were getting down into field goal range, even though they only made the 2 trips into the red zone. But Dallas doing a good job on defense to keep this score as low as it was. It could have been a lot higher if those field goals would have turned into touchdowns. They only had that one rushing touchdown by Cam Newton in the game, which in this game Cam Newton was 16 of 27, 183 passing yards, but he had 12 carries for 45 yards in that rushing touchdown, the only offensive touchdown for the Panthers in this game. And John Stewart, the Green Lantern, 21 carries for 68 yards. He also had 3 receptions for 9 yards, giving him 77 total yards on the day. Jericho Cotchery had 5 receptions for 73 yards, and Greg Olsen had 5 receptions for 70 yards. And Romo, before leaving the game after the third quarter, it was the final play of the third quarter that he went down, and he was 11 for 21, 106 passing yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And Matt Castle in the fourth quarter, Matt Castle was looking a lot better than he had previously. Of course, it was garbage time at that point. 13 of 19, 93 yards and a touchdown. Darren McFadden and Robert Turbin were tied for 11 yards as Dallas's leading rusher. Although I use that term loosely, but Turbin actually got 11 yards off of 2 carries. Darren McFadden had 11 yards off of 10 carries. So better production by Turbin, but he only had 2 carries. And you got to wonder when they're going to integrate him more into the offense. McFadden also had 4 catches for 45 yards, which gave him a total of 56 yards on the day. And Cole Beasley had 6 receptions for 44 yards, and the only touchdown for the Cowboys in this game. Of course, that one came late in the fourth quarter. And then we look at the kickers. Gano, 4 of 5 on the field goals, 3 of 3 on the extra points. Dan Bailey, 2 for 2 on the field goals, and did not attempt an extra point. Of course, they went for 2 on that offensive touchdown, which they did convert, as McFadden got that pass from Castle for the 2 points. But on defense, Thomas Davis with that sack, that was a sack that knocked Romo out of the game. Kuechly had 2 interceptions, including a pick 6. Kurt Coleman also had an interception for a pick 6. And Ely had a sack. And for the Cowboys, Crawford had a sack. And we look at the team stats, 18 first downs for the Panthers, 14 first downs for the Cowboys. And on third down, the Panthers were 8 of 16, 50%. And the Cowboys 6 of 13, 46%. They went for it once on fourth down and did not convert as they ended up turning the ball over on downs on their final possession of the game. And we'll get total net yards, 294 rather, for the Panthers, 210 for the Cowboys. And on the ground, the Panthers netted 129. The Cowboys netted just 31. So 4 times as many rushing yards for the Panthers as the Cowboys. The Cowboys actually netted more passing yards, 179, as Romo was sacked twice, losing 20 yards. And for the Panthers, they netted 165 through the air. Cam Newton was sacked once for a loss of 18 yards. We'll look at the penalties in this game. 8 penalties against the Panthers, 53 yards penalized. 5 penalties against the Cowboys as they were penalized for 40 yards. The Panthers did have 1 fumble, but they did not lose it. They recovered their own fumble. And then the red zone, both teams were 1 for 2 as they were each 50% in the red zone. As the Panthers didn't make a lot of trips to the red zone. They were being held out of the red zone as the Cowboys defense was doing a pretty good job in this game, but the offense kept putting them in bad positions. As the Carolina defense with those interceptions of 2 defensive touchdowns, and that other interception led to a field goal, so they ended up with 17 points off of those 3 interceptions. And they just, Graham Gano kept banging it through the uprights, other than that blocked field goal late in the game. And then we look at the time of possession, 35 minutes, 14 seconds for Carolina, 24 minutes, 46 seconds for Dallas. And please excuse my energy level. I had so much tryptophan via the turkey here on Thanksgiving, and a lot of turkey. I actually fell asleep momentarily after the game due to all the turkey intake. But hopefully some dessert will wake me up here. But this game kind of was over right from the first possession. As soon as Kurt Coleman intercepted Romo for that pick 6, I pretty much was like, well, this game's over. I mean, yeah, there was still a lot of football left to play, but the one thing in this game that was, I thought would be the deciding factor would be Carolina's defense. And the only chance the Cowboys really had was if Romo came out there and played one of his best games. And this was definitely not that. It was actually probably his worst game. The Panthers really just dominated this one. And they did it with their D. They were getting the pressure on Romo, and then they were doing a heck of a job staying in their lanes as they were covering the receivers and picking off the ball left and right. And it was just a full team effort. And they were moving the ball decently, getting down into field goal range. They just had trouble getting into the end zone, as the Cowboys were playing some pretty good defense themselves, although they weren't able to force any turnovers. And those field goals kept racking up as Graham Gano put 12 points on the board just off of those 4 field goals alone. And then, with those defensive touchdowns, that would be enough. Of course, Cam Newton with that rushing touchdown, that was pretty spectacular as he flipped into the end zone, making a play that only Cam Newton really could do the way he, while he was kind of spinning in the air, he lifted the ball up to make sure it crossed the plane, then brought it into his body. Most quarterbacks would have fumbled the ball right there, but Cam Newton had it pretty secure, as he's got the biggest hands in all of football. So Cam doing the Superman, and he found a Carolina Panther fan in the stands actually wearing his jersey to give the ball away to. So Carolina rolling in this one. They got a big win in a very dominant fashion on the road, as it's always tough to win in Dallas regardless, especially with Tony Romo under center. now with Romo going down, that all but does it for the Cowboys. They're not mathematically eliminated, but their chances now are beyond slim to none, as they're very, very slim at this point. I mean, they'd really have to win out and get a lot of help to have any chance. Even as it was with Romo, they were going to have their work cut out for them and need a lot of help, but it was possible. But now, without Romo, and now they're 3-8. I mean, and they still got to face some tough teams in their schedule, especially if Romo, it's not going to be able to play, which that's pretty much the case. And Romo, I'll tell you, he's definitely one of the toughest competitors in all of football. I think he might have came back a little bit early there. He got the win in Miami, but then right here on the short week with the short turnaround for this game, he gives it his all. He puts it all out on the field, but it's a very physical game, and it's really going to come down to waiting to see what happens next year. As it were, they really haven't had much of a running game this year, as they didn't address their running back issues in the offseason, and that's really come back to really bite them this year. And the Panthers, though, they just keep rolling, and the way they're playing, you wonder if anybody's going to be able to beat them in the next 5 games, as they just keep on winning. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great week, and have a great weekend, and have a happy Thanksgiving, and enjoy all the sports.